good evening, everyone, and welcome to the History Colorado program, Join Up, Horse Traditions in Ute Culture and History, where we will explore the past, present, and future of the human-horse relationship in the Southern Ute tribe in particular. Generously supported by the Dea Family Foundation, Cathy Carpenter Dea, and Peter Dea, this program is also sponsored by the Borderlands of Southern Colorado lecture series, as well as the Insights and In-Person Connection series, based out of the Curatorial Services and Collections Access Work Unit at History Colorado. To begin in the spirit of healing and education, we acknowledge the 48 contemporary tribes with historic ties to the state of Colorado. These tribes are our partners. We consult with them when we plan exhibits, collect and preserve and interpret artifacts, do archaeological work, and create educational programs such as this one. We recognize these Indigenous peoples as the original inhabitants of this land. I especially want to acknowledge that this program would not have been possible without the efforts of Ms. Cassandra Atencio, one of the presenters this evening and NAGPRA coordinator of the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. Also, Mr. Garrett Briggs, NAGPRA coordinator of the Southern Ute Indian Tribe, and especially Ms. Shelly Thompson, Cultural Preservation Officer for the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. It has been one of the best experiences of my time at History Colorado to coordinate tonight's program with them, and I thank them so much for making it possible. So here's our land acknowledgement in writing. So tonight's program is part of a large—
I would like to say thank you.
Please go ahead. Cassandra, if you would like to say something, please do.
I would like to say a welcome to everyone that joined us this evening. Mike, Dea, you know, I really thank you, Dea, and I'd like to also thank you, Tamar, for setting this up and including us in this series about the horse culture. The horse, you know, as you know, the horse culture is very important to the Ute people. So once again, I would like to tell you thank you and to everyone that's listening in tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Cassandra. It's like I said, it's been one of the best experiences to work with you on this. And for folks who are joining us from the Insights and In-Person Connections program, we also did something in August on Pikes Peak and whatnot. So glad to have some history and relation with you folks. So I'm just gonna situate what is Join Up. So tonight's program is part of a larger programmatic series called Join Up that is gonna run through June 2021, next summer. So for each month, we are going to explore equine culture and communities affiliated with Colorado and the American West. And Cathy, hopefully I'll correct that for you in a moment. Corey, if you don't mind helping her out. Each month, we're going to explore equine communities in Colorado and the American West for the purpose of developing an exhibition at History Colorado on the human-horse connection. We will do so by hosting programs like this one, like the one we have this evening, where we bring together scholars, experts, communities, and audiences such as yourself for presentations, conversations, and best of all, storytelling. So for tonight, we invite you to not only listen and learn during the presentations, but feel compelled to contribute your questions and stories as you see fit. You can do so by typing in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and Corey will help facilitate those questions or any other needs you have, especially when we open up the Q&A to presenters toward the latter half of this program tonight. To that end, please know that we are recording this program to use it as a resource for developing the exhibition. So whatever is shared this evening will be very informative to the exhibition's development. If you want to share but do not feel comfortable or prepared to do so, you can reach out to us afterward at the email and phone number at the listed on this slide here. So with that being, with introductions and instructions now complete, let's get started with tonight's program. I actually wanted to set the intention tonight with this quote by Leslie Marmon Silko. It just seems so appropriate for the storytelling emphasis of tonight's presentation, as well as for the era in which we find ourselves. So I'll give you a moment to read it and contemplate it, and then we'll continue. That being said, I would like to call on our presenters for this evening to introduce themselves, and we would like to begin with Mr. Irving Taylor.
My name is Erwin Taylor. My parents are Henry Taylor and Chloe Box. I'm a Southern Ute Indian member. I'm a watch. I news from my Abras, Wagon of Kawa, Southern Ute Indian people in history. When I was a little boy, I remember that many of our tribal members had horses. I'm going to name them. Birches had many beautiful race horses. Jack Frost, he's had many race horses. They also were cowboys. Another tribal member, Ed Howe, he had horses and cattle. Bunny Kent was a cowboy and had horses and cattle. Lee Joe Jefferson had horses and cattle. Also, the Fritz Box, he had horses, beautiful animals. Another family that had was Joe Weaver. He had horses, cattle. The history of our tribe, that's how they got along going to town from Ignacio and Bayfield. Some of our tribal members used wagons, the horse and buggy days, to travel, to go to Bayfield shopping or Ignacio shopping. Not only that, they also went to the Spanish Trail Fiesta in Durango on wagons and on horses to participate in the fair there. And the tribe was always welcome there. They put on dances. The tribal members, the Utes, they were pretty well known. They would camp there at the fairgrounds. And they would participate in their dances, in the rodeos, the roping. And also, the first buggy, the first tribal rubber tire wagon was owned by Robert Weaver and my aunt Ella Weaver. And they used to travel to Bayfield to go shopping. And that wagon that they had was just like a Cadillac. We would hitch a ride to go to shopping with them, and then bring us back home to my mom and her sister, Eloise. And today, we talk about the horses. I like to go back when the Southern Utes used to travel over the Wolf Creek Pass to Creed to do hunting over in the San Luis Valley up around Denver. They were meat eaters. And also, my tribe had marked some of the trees on the Continental Divide with little pegs. When you rode a horse or walking, you could see the pegs on what they call the Colorado Trail that was marked by the Southern Ute Tribe. And the Indians, the Southern Ute Tribe, when they'd come back in the fall, they would travel the Colorado Trail on horses. Sometimes they would walk, and they would stop. And there was a family over in the San Luis Valley in Creed, where the Southern Ute Tribe used to stop. Like the parent I talked to, but he is gone, dead and gone now. But his name was Ron Thompson. His parents would trade with the Southern Ute Tribe. They were welcome there. Also, over on that private ranch in Creed, there was Southern Ute Indian drawings there. And the Utes were pretty well known. They trade furs, they trade for food, whatever they had of their goods. These are some of the history that I know about my life as a horses. I learned from a gentleman. His name was Henry Norris. He was married to my aunt, Marjorie Taylor. I would ride his horse. He had a racehorse. He was tall. Sometimes I'd go to town riding for my aunt to go get groceries on the horse and come back. And also, when we were also hunters, we also rode horses to hunt. We had horses we could pack on, elk and deer. We would camp out on little tents when we were young. We had a lot of beautiful country that we rode through the Pine River, up the Pine River Valley, the Pedro Valley, the Emerald Lake, the Williams Creek. These were the trails that many of our tribal members marked for history. And they would travel along the San Luis Valley, up the San Luis Valley to Siwatch. They would go from Siwatch all the way up to Canyon City, Buena Vista, and on horseback riding, and that's how they got around. The horse was very popular Used them in rodeos. Used them in barrel racing. They also used them in calf roping. They also used them in bronc riding in the Southern Ute Indian fairs. And they would use them for calf roping, bulldogging. That tribe. And we would ride horses to get around. And my kids, Trent, Lance, their grandpa, Fred McIntyre, taught them how to break horses, how to train them, and how to teach a horse to communicate with them. And they also roped in rodeos. And they had fun. Also, a young man, he's gone today, Elroy Behill. He rode in the Hickory Apache, the long trail ride on horseback. They would travel. And I remember when he was a young man, he said that was a dangerous ride that he ever rode in. He said he would never ever do that again. And his folks also had horses. And he was also a roper. He learned. He comes from a family that had cattle, horses. And that was some of our history of our family. Thank you very much. I appreciate talking to you and bringing some of the great tribal members that are gone today. And to end this up, I would like to say Leonard Birch always rode a horse in the Ute Fair and also in the Spanish Trail, which represented our tribe, which we were very proud of. And I was proud because he was a good tribal chairman and brought us through many storms to work together and how we all participated. And I would like to say thank you again and God bless those folks that are gone today that brought us with the horse.
And I would like to thank, I would like to thank my elder, Mr. Taylor, for speaking about his knowledge on the horse culture and, his growing up, and thank him very much for participating and be willing to speak with us on this podcast, or, and so Doyak, thank you, Irv. And I would like to say that I would like to welcome everybody again. Nia, my name is, like I said, my late father was the late Alden Aranjo. I am Moat and Kaputa. My mother was the late Dorothy Naranjo Frost, and she was part Northern Ute and Southern Ute, and she was a very big horse person. I come from a family of horse people. I've seen some people in the chat box that I would welcome also to come and talk and speak about their experience and their knowledge. Miss Hilda Birch and Miss Vivian Torres, Councilwoman. Thank you for also being on this podcast and listening in. So the horse culture for us, as far as I know it, from what I've learned, is that, we were introduced to the horse by the Spaniards around 1580. The Ute people, the Moch people, and the Caputo people claim that we were the first ones to have the horse before the Comanches, before anybody else. That we gave them the horse, helped them. My dad would tell a story about 10 Bears and about how they how the Moch helped them way back when and gave horses. And so we were allies, the Comanches, before we were their enemies. And the horse was a medicine person, and it was really, really sacred to us, and horses were prized possessions. And throughout the years up to today, as you can tell, it's the same way. They were more prized than even children. We would trade for horses. We would trade. We were raiders and traders, and the traders would we would trade those horses to the Spaniards and down in Taos. And so I would like to bring that part of the history in. Once we got to the horse, we were able to extend our reign out more. When we got into the Plains Indians, we could hunt more of the Plains buffalo and the bigger buffalo. We were able to do that. We were able to expand our homelands and our hunting grounds all the way up. Like Mr. Taylor said, those prized possessions of those horses were, them Appaloosas, them quarter horses, and, those paint horses. And those are still, revered today. When you do, when you get married, a lot of times it would be horses and blankets that you gave to the father, that would give to the father for what he wanted to give them, for as a dowry. And then, so that was part of that prized possession of wealth, about how many horses you had. My grandparents, Mr. Jack Frost, who Mr. Taylor mentioned, was a horse person to raise horse races. My mother was a barrel racer, so it was my Aunt Dixie. We used to ride horses ourselves. My mother was one of the first rodeo queens, along with my grandmother, Miss Bertha Marie Grove Birch. And I wanted to say that, he was right. The Birch family, they did have a lot of horses, quarter horses. There was also polo. My grandpa was a part of the polo team that was in Bayfield. So I think horses and rodeo, all of that kept us connected. They taught us how to, as you're raising a horse, how to talk to him, how to break him, how to go in the river and get him to do there. So that way, if you fell off, you'd be going into water. Talking to them, how you raise them and come up to them. And, I think that part of that raising and learning about horses teaches yourself that patience, and teaches you to learn that you're not in control, that somebody else has that horse animal, notices if you're scared. He has an opinion of his own, he has to get to like you. So I'm really honored to be here tonight. And I think that throughout history, for our horses, for the Ute people, we carry that on today with ranching, carry it on with rodeo, just like Mr. Taylor said. So I'll turn it over to anybody else from the tribe that has wants to speak. Thank you, Tamar, and I want to thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. And there is so much more that we can absolutely learn from you. But I'm going to turn it over to Marjorie Berry, and she's going to present and share now. Marjorie, you're unmuted now.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Let me try to get my video on. Let's see. I was able to before, but it doesn't look like I can do it now. Tamar, can you help me get the video on?
I certainly can. Absolutely. Let me just upgrade you there. Like, give me 1 minute,
Thank you,
folks.
everyone.
Sorry, folks, 1 second. Let me find you. Here you are. Great. You're promoted to panelist. Where'd you go? There you are. Thanks, guys, for all your patience here. All right, try your video now, Marjorie. Perfect. Okay.
Good evening, everybody. This is Marjorie Berry from Southern Ute Reservation in Aranjo, Colorado. I grew up in the horse culture as a very young child. I'm going to go back in history, though, to the 1800s. Around 1870, my great-great-grandmother was from Mountain Ute Reservation. Her name was Ruth Wing. My grandfather was Charles Charles Rock, and he was a Southern Ute. And they had a son named Brian Rock, who was born in the 1900s in Ignacio, Colorado. And his Indian name, his Ute name was Sapagu, which means white fish. And he grew up as a child in Toyac. And by this time, the Southern Utes in the Ute Mountains had to live on their reservations, and they couldn't leave the reservation. So what my grandfather Sapagu would do, and his young men his ages, they would saddle up their horses and they would ride from Toyac, Colorado over to Mancos, Colorado, which is maybe 50, I don't remember how many miles, 50, 40. And they would hoop and holler, and they would circle the homesteaders' cabins and raise a little bit of dust. And then after they did that, after circling a homesteader's cabin, they would race back to Toyac and rest their horses, because that's the only thing they could do anymore. And that was a little bit of enjoyment that they probably really scared the homesteaders. They never had any violence. That was just what they did occasionally. And that was a story my grandfather told me. And fast forward to 1927, and my father, William Thompson, is born. And he was raised on the Southern Ute Reservation, the Ute Mountain Ute Reservation, and Northern Ute. When he was growing up in Toyac, he went down to the Mancos Creek area, and one of his elder Ute uncles used him to break horses. And this was the old-fashioned way, just like Miss Cassandra said. They would take the horses down into a creek and break them that way. And then once he got older, Mr. William Thompson, my father, got older, then he did the bronc riding circuit. And they would have rodeos in the Ignacio area, in Durango, Pagosa, and Bayfield had a famous little rodeo up there every late fall, I think. So he participated in all of those. When I was born, the first gift I was given was a horse. I was about, I think, 3 or 4 years old. And my dad brought this huge white horse and gave it to me because the Ute people treasured horses. And that was just a token of how much he cared for me. And then we had several outings. My grandfather, Brian Rock Sapagu, owned a small cattle ranch south of Bayfield, Colorado. And he raised cattle and farmed on a 200-acre ranch that he owned. Although it was considered an allotment, my grandfather purchased that allotment on his own. It wasn't given to him by the government, from the cattle that he sold on his cattle operation. And we rode horses. I would ride my horse as a young child and take my grandfather and my uncle's water in a canteen. And that was my job as a child. I started riding horses at the age of maybe 2 years old, and rode all the way up until my preteens. My uncles would have to saddle my horses for me because I was so short. And then later on, they got me a bench and said, if you're going to ride those horses, then you better start learning how to put the saddle on. And so then once I got into my preteens, I and my neighbors immediately to the north of me, one of her name was June Box, the daughter of the late Fritz Box, and June is now deceased. We would get our horses saddled up and we would go for rides on the weekends, something that we do not do anymore. And that was our form of recreation. We would ride up and down the Pine River and go sightseeing on our horses, and we'd ride all over our family ranches here. And I just like to say that we were so lucky to have those days together to ride our horses and to share those times, because now that we're in the present, we do not have that opportunity. Our children no longer are raised to become acquainted with taking care of your horses, taking care of being outside, having to go to the farm and raise hay and alfalfa and irrigate, because we've gotten away from that culture. My uncles also at that time, they would have to get permits to leave the reservation. So they would get a permit and they'd buy hunting permits from the state of Colorado. They would load their horses up in their old pickups and they'd drive up to the mountains and they would hunt on their horses and bring the deer that they had gotten, deer and elk, back home. They would dress those animals out, and my grandmother, my mother, and my aunts would dry the meat, and then they would fix that meat. It would be dried and put it away so that we would have food for the winter, so that we would always be, they would also can, something we never do anymore. But had they not had the horse to help them in their hunting trips, they wouldn't be able to get those big animals that sustained our people throughout the winter months. So my aunt, Mercedes Rock, was also one of the early Ute Fair queens, and I believe she was a Ute Fair queen in the 50s or late 40s, way before they had an established fair, but they would get together. Our Ute people would also have horse races down at our little rodeo grounds, and they would have horse races, and I believe now they have what we call a chicken pool, where they go ahead and race around and compete against one another. But we had some really good participation back in the day, and right now our Southern Ute tribe is reviving that rodeo event so that people can once again pick up where we had left off with our horse culture. So thank you for allowing me to provide this short presentation, and I apologize that I didn't get more visual effects, but thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you so much, Ms. Berry, for what you contributed. Certainly talking with Shelly and Cassandra ahead of time, what is really striking is how the revival that's going on in the community. And I see that we have a lot of activity in the chat for thanking, and I've been recording some of the questions, but Shelly, I didn't know if you wanted to go and offer something, and if not, I do have a few questions and then we can open it up to the audience. And so I think I'll just follow up with Ms. Berry that I would love to hear, and I think other people who are attending this evening would love to hear about how did rodeo and ranching get introduced to the community. And if we could start with those origins, and then I have a follow-up question about some of its historical trajectory as well. And that can be open to Mr. Irving Taylor, Ms. Atencio, or Ms. Berry to answer. But how did rodeo and ranching come to the Ute community, and why do you think that it had such an appeal?
I can start that conversation. This is Marjorie Berry. When the Ute Indian people were placed on the reservations and we could no longer roam around. One of the things that the government wanted was to change us from a free-spirited group of people who were used to hunting and fishing and going where they could. We could no longer do that. We were placed on reservations and no longer allowed to roam around like we used to be. We were no longer free people. One of the things that they wanted us to do was to pick up the agricultural field. They wanted to take Ute hunters and make us farmers and ranchers. They wanted us to become people who could sustain themselves and become participating members of the society. So that is how we got into farming. And then at the Southern Ute Reservation, you either lived on your allotment or lived on a piece of land called an assignment, which was provided to you by the tribal government. But it was also trust land held in trust for us by the government. And then we were expected to farm that land. And then that's gradually we got our horses. We had always had horses before then, but now we had to use these horses in the farm and ranch industry. And from there, some of our younger Ute people who were really, really experts in riding horses and breaking horses naturally acclimated themselves into attending rodeos. And some of them were very, very good at the rodeo. And they really, really participated in the local rodeos. And that has continued forward to where now they have the Professional Indian Rodeo Association, and they have their own finalist, I think their rodeo finals in Las Vegas prior to COVID. But that's one of the ways that we had to get into agriculture, was when we were placed on the reservations. Thank you.
This is a question that the horse people out there might appreciate. And I love what's going on in the chat, and Corey's capturing all of this, so we'll get to your questions, folks. But when you say that there is a way of life with horses pre-reservation and then with reservations, and of course the introduction of agriculture, I'm wondering did the type of horse that was used and the type of horsemanship that was present, did it change? Did you have a different way of training and breaking and riding horses pre-reservation versus what you did on the reservation with ranching and so forth? And it might be an obvious question, but that's a really interesting shift. I know a lot of horse people might be interested in.
I think I might like to answer some of that. Pre-reservation, I think either way they would utilize it the same method, knowing that that was the best way, and carrying some of that on to the younger, because those older people were really young kids, like what Marge was talking about in those in the 1800s. So when they came into the reservation, a lot of them were walking. A lot of them weren't able to have their horses when they came in, but they kept that knowledge. So I think that was more of an oral that came back down, and with the knowledge, knowing that it was better to go take your horse to the river. I think that's kind of common sense when you talk about it. And like Miss Berry said, and thank you, Marge, for being on this panel, is that they were good at that, rodeo, buck riding, horse bronc riding. A lot of the Ute men were bronc riders, and so they acclimated, and a lot of the women were barrel horse riders, and so I think that that was where they good. I knew that my mom, I have a picture of my mother when she was about 18, and she was like a trick rider. So there's a picture of her standing on the back of her horse, and she had this one horse named Babe that would do whatever. He was a cutting horse, and he was her calf roper horse and her trick riding horse, and she could stand on the back of it with her hands out. I think, like Marge said, that was a time, and so pre-reservation and after reservation, I think it kept it was an outlet, because I mean, imagine yourself living in somewhere under an invisible fence. You know, there were repercussions for having those animals, and so trying to tame them. I mean, look at what happened at Meeker. You know, Meeker happened because of horse racing. You know, because of horses. You know, for that entailed spirit, and I think that, you know, those things still went on. You know, there's a place up on top of the hill that my grandma talked about, where they would race horses that just do bets, and there was always bets at that fair. You know, when the fair came around, gambling was one of those things too that people did. You know, with those horse races, having race horses. You know, they got into the Spanish trails and them and raced their own horses. You know, and Tony and having the Hickoria Trail. You know, riding that wagon trail ride. There's a wagon road that goes through the gap that they say, but a different trail that takes you from here all the way to Hickoria, you know, and down on into Promo in that way. So there was this wagon trail that, you know, Hilda Birch that's on here, her dad went to, and they got back there, rejuvenated it. Horses that they rejuvenated through the equine program for kids, you know, for that behavioral health. And so when we talk about behavioral health, you know, that's how those horses teach you that patience and kind of calming you down. So thank you.
We have
Another
a lot.
thing,
Yeah, please.
oh, pardon me.
No, you're fine. Go ahead. They're here for you, not me.
Thank you. This is Marjorie Berry. Another another one of the reasons I think they used the water was because the water was a natural, I guess, a comfort area. Like if you were bucked off and landed in the water, you didn't sustain the serious injuries that you would if you were bucked off on dirt. And way back in the day, there were no medical facilities like health clinics, hospitals that our people could go to. So they had to be very, very careful and avoid getting serious injuries, because if you happen to sustain a broken leg, it could be fatal. I remember reading when I worked at the BIA agency, reading the old journals from our old Indian agents that used to be here. Was a young Ute boy had fallen off a horse and had sustained a broken leg, and he laid there, and because there were no medical facilities around, there was nothing they could do for him, because it might have been an open fracture, and eventually he succumbed to his injuries. So breaking horses the safest way possible was done. And another reason is the Native Americans and Ute people didn't have the equipment that they have now. They didn't have fancy saddles, and they didn't have fancy bridles to use. Everything that the Native Americans use, the Ute people use, were made. They made their own. They made their own saddles. They made their own luggage. I can't remember what the name of it is called, to use on the horses. They made their own bridles. So everything was made within the Ute household. And so that they not only did, when they got their deer and elk, they used all of the items from the animals to use in the household. And that was what they used to make their riding equipment. And their ropes. The ropes were made from vegetation, various plants that they made into twine ropes. So everything that they used from Mother Earth and from the animals, they turned around and used it when they were working with their horses. Thank you.
I wanted to, this is Cassandra Atencio. I wanted to bring forth to before the horse came and before pre-reservation, way long time ago, we eat this, like they say, you know, which is more than 100 years ago, more than 1,000 years, but that we have a name for the horse. The Mwich people have a name for the horse. The old name that we didn't first start calling him Cava. You know, we borrowed that name from the caballo from the Spanish people. But that the first name that we gave to the horse was Maguchurum.
meant like long nose or something like close to the ground or something. My father is the one, he was a historian, my late father, the late Eldon Aranjo, and he had told us that that's what from his elders, he had heard that was that old name. Just like, Arupet is a name for that woolly mammoth, and so Magutsurum was that with the long nose that was kind of close to the ground, was what we first called them. And that was what the Moawatch people called them, Moawatch Band of Utes. So that to me, when you have a name about them, and to me, he said that he thought that was because of the pre-horse, the horse that was running around with the woolly mammoth, that's who they were referring to. And so when we talk about our people, and we have names for these animals in our own language, that tells you that we were there, that we were present. Because why would we have a name for something in our own language, that speaks to something? Thank you.
And Cassandra, to that point, when we were speaking earlier in preparation for this program, what is the origin story of the horse? I know that, ethnologists might point to that the horse was acquired by the Spanish, but is there something about the origin story of the horse for the Ute that we should know tonight?
No, there's not an origin story. It just tells you about that. That what I just told you was something that we named that they saw. So that's just like putting into context that we were there at the same time that these animals were there, and then they must have disappeared, and then comes the new horse that was brought to us by the Spaniards, in a different mode, in a different way, more than likely. And I can't tell you more than that because, we don't have anybody that's living, that's that old or that's been there with anymore with them, with about more of that old story, and I wish my father was still here, so he could explain it a little bit more in depth, about how that came about. Thank you.
We had a question in the chat, and that the first horse acquired from the Spanish were Mustangs. But the question that I have is that how the first horses were identified? Are there particular breeds, certain lineages, bloodlines that the Ute pay attention to and kind of cultivate and venerate in your community? Are there special kinds of horses? And that's open to anybody who wants to answer.
Mr. Taylor, I think, they have race horses and quarter horses, and I think he could speak to that. And I think Mr. Cespuch is on here and Miss Berry. Mustangs, we did use them. We used paint horses. I'd like to hear from Mr. Taylor about what because those were race horses. And so I turn it to him and to my other elders.
Well, we can bring it up to contemporary times. Of course, 2020 has been a really unprecedented year, but you have noted that there has been a revival, not just in rodeo and the youth fair, but also horses for, therapeutic reasons. And where are these horses? Who is taking care of them? Yeah, could you give us kind of a snapshot of what horses look like today? I know also that Miss Berry mentioned that subsequent generations really haven't had that experience of riding around and having those bonding experiences between, people and families and the horses. But where do horses stand today?
In the same spot that they've always been revered and precious and prized. I would think that's in my opinion.
This is Marge. I would also agree with Miss Atencio. The people still have a special respect for the horse. Some of our present day tribal members here and in Ute, Mountain Ute at Toyac, they still use the horse on ranching operations. And some of our tribal members have even specialized in race horses, I believe. And some of them do quarter horses for ranching. So, and some just ride horses for entertainment. But I do believe that they do use a lot of the quarter horses for their agricultural endeavors.
We had another question come in the chat about what have horses taught you? What are some of the lessons that today, past generations, that horses teach you?
Can you repeat that?
The question is, what have horses taught you? When you work with horses, what do you learn from them?
This is Marge. I think what was taught was responsibility, that you had to be responsible for something. You had to take care of it. You had to make sure that this animal, this horse that was your friend. The first thing you're taught is to become familiar and become friends with them. And there are ways that different Native Americans are taught when they meet their horse, and how you become their friend, because that's what you had to depend on way back in the day, you know, to get you from here and there, especially if you're out in the wilderness hunting and you get separated from your family. That horse knows the way home. It would know the way home. You could sit on your horse, and if it didn't want to take you to visit your neighbor, it would stop and it would turn around and actually go back home. Horses are very smart, very dependable, so that if say perhaps you got hurt or something and you got on a horse, it would know how to get you home. And people have trained their horses, especially people in the rodeo field. They have trained these horses to where they can communicate with them simply by sitting on them and using the pressure of their legs, left or right, so that the horse will know how to turn. They can communicate just with a physical touch. And horses are very dependable back in the Western days. You know, it took days and days to walk someplace. All of a sudden, our people had the horse. They went from people that traveled around on foot to people that went all over the southern Colorado, northern Colorado, into all the areas surrounding Colorado on these magnificent animals that allowed them to do that, to be dominant. So that's why they were prized. They were prized possessions. Thank you.
I like to tell you a story about my horse. You have to trust the horse, and he will trust you. I'm going to tell you, I was hunting on Wolf Creek Pass. The snow was clear up to the horse's chest. And my cousin, Ernest Pennycoos, was leading the horses. And he was going the wrong way. And this is where trust really comes to play. My horse stopped, and he didn't want to go that way. So I trust him. I talked to him, and I told him, go ahead and find a way. He turned around, he come back, and he crossed this trail. There was a trail wide enough because there was swamp on both sides. And if it wasn't for that horse, we would have never made it back to the trailhead. Thank you.
So understanding this kind of power and knowledge of horses, is there, and I'm asking kind of a basic question, but just so that there can be an opportunity to really expound upon it in this particular, you know, with the storytelling and the people here. This connection with the horses, is it spiritual? Is it just a phenomenon of two beings figuring each other out? How do you explain the intelligence of the horse? I mean, of course, through the stories you have, but maybe also you could comment on the spiritual import of horses. We've talked a lot about the practical, but how is the horse spiritual?
The horse is also spiritual in this way. When a horse can feel your spirit, his spirit, and you put it, he trusts you, because every animal has that spirit. If an animal is afraid of you, he will not trust you because he can feel your presence.
And tonight you've talked a lot about how, especially with the change from pre-reservation life to reservation life, that there were generations, people who carried on that knowledge of horses. How is that? Is that something that's taught, or is it something that's known about learning those aspects of horses? I'm curious about the education that goes into training about horses.
Tamara, this is Marjorie Berry. That is something that I was taught by my grandfather and my uncles. And my father, as a matter of fact, being 2 years old, my father was the one who put me on the horse the very first time. So once I remember when I was on my grandfather's ranch, he taught me which side, how to take care of my horse, how to brush him, how to talk to him, how to bend down and pick up his hooves and inspect them to make sure that there were no pebbles or anything stuck in their hooves, and the proper way to go around a horse, because a horse is a powerful, powerful animal. And it can sense if you're afraid or if you feel at ease with it. If it can sense that you're afraid of it, then it'll take advantage of that. But once you are taught how to become acquainted with your horse, how to make each of you feel comfortable with one another, then you establish that rapport. And there are certain things that you don't do to a horse. You don't come upon that horse suddenly from the rear, or it'll kick you and hurt you. It can really cause some serious damage. So that's part of just becoming familiar with this animal, this magnificent animal. And you know, that's something that I was taught, once I was taught as a young child, then I was not scared of the horse any longer. I was familiar with the horse, and I had one that I used in particular that I called my horse, and my uncle let me call that horse mine, and for many years I always thought it was mine, but it was actually his horse. But he never rode it, I did, so in a sense it was my horse. But that's how I started. I was taught, I was put on the horse by my father, and then I was taught by my grandfather and my uncles what to do, and gradually and we don't do that anymore. We've gone away from that culture, and now we're in the modern day culture, and we do need to get back to that. And it is good that someone mentioned that it's used as therapy also, because as a young person, you take care of that horse, you talk to it, and it understands. It goes by the tones in your voice. It understands and it responds that to you. Thank you.
This is Cassandra. I wanted to say I agree with Hilda and Mr. Taylor and Miss Berry, you know, about the spirit and about how you have to respect the horse. But I think when you're talking, And that brings into, you know, as you're doing this, you're learning something about yourself from the inside. You know, you're starting to calm yourself. You're starting, like they said, to bond. And so when you bond, that's a feeling, that's aesthetic, you know, and that aesthetic feeling and that bonding creates something in you. So that way you and that horse from that time on, you guys understand each other. You can communicate with each other. And then after you communicate with each other, because a long time ago, that's what they would do. When that elder or when that person died, they would take their favorite horse from it, pull out their favorite horse with them, and they'd kill him, you know, and bury him with them. And that would so he would have his horse to ride with him on the other side when he goes to see his family. So when he'd come upon these things, that, you know, those horses were sometimes buried with their owners, you know, as part of the things when you burn and you give away all that stuff when those people die, when someone dies. And so that's a practice that, you know, some families, and you have to understand that when we're talking about this, we're talking about our families. You know, you people weren't like huge big tribes where we all did things the same way. We were families and first, you know, and so everybody learned something a little bit different or did things a little bit different. And then when you intermarried in it, then you brought what you learned into that family. You know, men went to live with women, you know, because we were maternalistic. So you brought with the end. So your family gained those horses. But with those horses and that husband that you gained, or, you know, or as a wife, you know, that you would learn, you're learning that thing that goes down, back down to your children. And so a long time ago, like I said, they used to bury them with their favorite horse. So that goes on. So that connection isn't broken, you know, and that's the spirituality, some of it that goes with it. Thank you.
A question came in, and one that I also had was, and to describe a little bit about the adornment of horses. How are horses dressed for rodeo, for Ute Fair? What is the symbolism behind it? And then also anything about the painting of horses too, just kind of how horses are presented. To share that would be very interesting.
This is Marjorie Berry. I believe that some of the horses were painted with symbols that represented either some special feeling to the person who owned the horse, probably symbols to represent strength, bravery, various emotions, or various just representations of the owner of something, maybe that some event, maybe even, or something that they wanted the horse to that they put on the horse to represent. But I do know that a lot of Native Americans do bead work or quill work, and that they would dedicate huge amounts of time to make beaded decorations for their horses, including complete beaded headdresses that would cover the face of the head of the horse, along to beaded decorations around where the saddle is, and just various items like that. Do you have anything to add, Cassandra?
Yes, sure. Yes, we beaded like the bridles. There would be beaded bridles and around the eye symbols of the decoration. And like she said, the paint. When women would ride horses, they wouldn't ride it side saddle. They'd ride it like a man, but you'd put your shawl or a blanket over the front of it, so that way you couldn't see your legs, and wrap your blanket around it when you were riding your horse. When you decorate it, you would decorate it for like your shawls. And let me see. Can I get, okay. I wanted to show you a picture, you know, that of me riding a horse when I was royalty, but since we don't have the video.
Cassandra, I can give you video. I'll give you video.
Okay.
I think
And
you
so
have
we
it
would,
now.
okay.
And let me pull my stop sharing so people can see it big. You're good now. I love that.
So that's a horsey and that's a appy. And that's of me when I was Miss Southern Ute way back in the 80s. But as you can see, that was the way the women would get on the horses in a more contemporary time. And then as rodeo, they would, just dress up your horse like a rodeo, with the decorations and wear your best shirt and whatever else. And like I said, I think that was a lot of an individually, families would do it the way they wanted. There's no set way. My grandmother, Annetta Frost, she beaded Mr. Ben Nighthorse Campbell, the blue beaded stuff that goes on his horse. She made all those decoration, all the beaded material ornamentation for his horse way back in when I was like 14, 15 years old, which was about 40 years ago. And so, we would do those types of things. So I wanted to bring that up to give her that shout out of what she did to Senator Campbell for Senator Ben Nighthorse. Thank you.
This is Marge Berry. I have a picture to share with everyone, and let me see if I can do that. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Oh, wow, that's so beautiful.
That's a picture of me on the horse and Cassandra's grandmother, Miss Bertha Naranjo Groves. And that was taken when I was about 2 years old. And that's, my father was really into, working with horses, and he put me on the horse at a very young age. Thank you for allowing me to share that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And actually, Cassandra, you sharing that photo and also Ms. Berry, one question we had was, if you could describe a little bit, so we understand that, ranching came about with the reservation and the allotment, embracing that side of things, making it especially Ute. Then rodeos came around, the circuit was growing, and it became an opportunity. What is the relationship between rodeo and the Ute Fair, and the rodeo and the royalty, and maybe how that extended into powwow royalty and so forth? So maybe a little snapshot of that history, if that connection exists, but would love to hear more about just that connection between the royalty and the rodeo, if that serves a purpose.
This is Marge speaking, I'm sorry. Part of that relationship between I believe between the horse and the Ute Fair was that would show that our Ute royalty, our ladies, had the skills, had the horsemanship that was required of people back in the day. That it showed the other side of what the Ute people were, what the Ute women were, because many times in the olden times, Ute women had to pick up and help the men defend our people, and that was also, they were expert horse people as well as the men. So showing that skill in the Ute Fair in the parade was just a way of saying, our people still use the horse, we still possess the skills, and it was just a representation of the times. We've kind of gotten away from that, but we're getting back into that again, and hopefully we'll have more of our younger people picking that back up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say that people are really thanking you both for sharing those photos. That just really makes it just really tangible, and yeah, having that visual reference is really special. So if folks want to drop some questions in the chat, we'd love to provide an opportunity for that. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Look at that. Can you tell us about that photo?
That's my aunt. Her name was Mercedes Rock, and she was one of the earlier Ute Fair royalty, I believe. And that was taken she was born in 1925, and she might have been 15 or 16 then. So, you know, that's early times. And that she was really best friends with Casey's grandmother, Bertha. So they were all participating in our Ute Fair at that time. Thank you.
Wonderful. I certainly have plenty of questions because this is my bread and butter as an anthropologist. But if anybody has some questions in the chat, I want to open up for the last 10 minutes here. I know people have been chiming in all along. But if there's something we haven't covered yet, I would love to give the opportunity to do so. Or I can continue asking questions, you know, maybe just kind of a backstory to this whole Join Up initiative, pre kind of pandemic era, was we went to the Rocky Mountain Horse Expo at the Hall of Education in the National Western Stock Show grounds toward the end of February of this year. Feels like it was a lifetime ago. And History Colorado had a booth there. And one thing we were doing was, of course, communicating that we had this initiative going on. And at the time, it was going to be a 2-day symposium. We're going to bring everybody together in one place and have just one day of presentation and one day of everybody talking about all the great ideas that came out of the presentations. But one thing we wanted to do ahead of time was ask people 2 kind of really orienting questions. And I want to pose these questions to our panelists tonight. And the first question, it's pretty basic, and of course, I think in so many ways we've addressed it tonight. But I want to ask our panelists, what do you love about horses?
This is Marge. As a child, what I loved about the horses was that it allowed me to participate in things in our normal day-to-day lives back then, taking care of my grandfather's ranch. Not one time did they ever say, oh, you're just a little girl, you can't do that. My 2 uncles and my grandfather included me just as if I was an adult helping them take care of the ranch. I had to take care of my horse. I had responsibility. That horse was my best friend. And you know, you can never ever forget those times, because like many of us, this was before the age of high tech. This was old school stuff. People still raised their own, had their gardens. They depended on hunting. Our people depended on hunting, and we depended on the horse. Even though we depended on farm machinery, we still depended on our horse to help us round up the cattle and to go hunting. And those are times that you can never ever forget. And those are times that our youth are not going to have, because that was the last remnants of holding on to our Ute horse culture days. And it's just a way of saying this is something that my father loved, that he shared with me. And that's the same thing that my grandfather and my uncles did, was they shared that love of the horse and being able to, there's nothing like getting on, and you know this yourself, Tamara, that there's nothing like getting on your horse and getting that feeling of being one with your horse and taking in the outdoors and being out there riding in the wide open. It's just an experience you can never forget. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I want to give an opportunity to Cassandra or Mr. Taylor to answer if they want to.
I'd like Mr. Taylor to go ahead and go first.
I'd like to say a little bit about my horse. I'd like to show you a picture of him. He's very special. He was kind. He trust me. And every time I would saddle him, he would just stand. I used to give my little horse what they call roll cubes. It looked like, some people would say it would be like a candy, but it'd be small. That when he would do something good like that, I would give him a couple of those little cubes. And I would give him a treat. That's why I really loved my little horse. And I'll never forget him because his spirit and my spirit was more from the heaven and earth of the way of trust. Thank you.
Cassandra, did you want to chime in? We have some really neat questions coming in about how to support youth programs, but I wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to share what you love about horses.
I just wrote down and it gave the connection, but that love was that growing up, like Marge said, you know, as you get older, you know, I have horses, but no one to break them, you know, and so having someone when I was younger, there was always a horse to be able to ride and take care of. And my uncles had broken them. In fact, my uncle Ray Frost is still in a rodeo and a horse family. And you know, they raised like bucking horses and things, and now they have a big old horse ranch. But I wanted to say that it gave a sense of accomplishment and freedom, you know. I mean, and the accomplishment was that joy and that pride of being able to sit atop an animal and he's letting you. That's what I loved about it. The thing about you had something to do, you know, it was okay to go try to round up the horse and catch them and everybody working together, you know. That was something that we did as a group of kids or as a group of family, you know, and Miss Hilda Birch that's on here, you know, my uncle, late Uncle Ever, her dad, you know, her dad and my grandmother Bertha were brother and sister, and so their horses were down the way, and so it was always fun to be able to ride horses. My grandma at one point gave us these little bitty Shetlands to ride around, that we could ride around, yes, bareback. It was fun to ride bareback and to learn that. And it's amazing to know that the things that you learned, like using your knees, you know, to guide and move your horse, are things that people don't really learn anymore. You know, with that guiding and using your knees and the flexing and moving one way. That was one of the first things I was learned there, like when my mom and my uncles were teaching us how to ride the horse, and it was that accomplishment, you know, and being able to do that. And that's what I loved about being around horses. The horses that we have now, you know, they come up to us when we feed them, but they're wild basically. And it would be cool, the kids like them, but getting to that point of being able to be close and connect with them, it's just not there, they said. And it would be great to be able to figure out how to reconnect, because we are moving away from that. And we do have these families that are on here that still do horses, and what is the best way to reintroduce it and reinvigorate it? And so we would welcome the help. Thank you.
Cassandra, that's a perfect way to kind of address this question that has come up a couple times in chat about how can we support, how can we, know about the youth programs? What does the future look like for horse traditions in the Ute community, particularly the Southern Ute community? And that's open for everybody, including people like Miss Hilda Birch, who's been chiming in the chat. I've been saving a lot of the chat, by the way, so thank you for those gems. But what does the future of the horse look like for future generations is the question. And why is it important?
One more time. I need to think about this good.
Yeah, it's a big question. So Miss Berry, we're just looking in the chat here, but just what is the revival of the Ute Fair, of bringing the horse traditions back to the youth? How can that be supported, and why is that important to the future?
This is Marjorie. Thank you. I think that's really important because for so many years we didn't have the Southern Ute Fair and rodeo. And our young people and our people in general weren't exposed to the horse like they used to be. By bringing it back to our people in our own events and featuring more of the horse associated events in our fair, then that gives us an opportunity to have our people, say, well, this is what we used to do. Maybe we could create more programs for our youth. And that's an option that we can do, create more programs, because we do have a therapy horse program that operates at our local Sky Ute Downs. So maybe opening that up and talking to our young people and sending out bulletins and trying to get them, back into riding the horse. But what's required now is, back then, a lot of people were in the agriculture. They raised hay. A lot of our people raised hay. Nowadays, you can't make money off of doing that. You have to get a regular job. And then it's so expensive to farm. But yet, if people are willing to help, young people are willing to say, let's start a group and let's get our people interested, then I think that's what's going to get us back into it. And I remember that I got back into it when I was married. My neighbor, who happened to be my sister-in-law, we purchased a couple of horses. And then my neighbor and her husband, they purchased their horses. And then we got our kids into riding. And that's how my son started riding and my nieces. So it's with, parents and family getting the youth back into that. But it's a responsibility. It's a commitment. And I purchased again. I tried to get back into it. A couple of years ago, I purchased a horse for my grandchildren, and my son was up here every day. He was brushing that horse, and it was a form of therapy for him.
Mm-hmm.
He'd come up every evening and he'd brush that horse and just stand out there and talk to it. He'd come feed it every evening. I mean, it was just something that he really enjoyed. So just by taking on that commitment and responsibility, by being able to commit to it, is the only way we're going to get back into it. Thank you.
And I agree. This is Cassandra. I agree with all the chat that Miss Birch said and Miss Berry said about the horse and how to bring it back. And my comment there was like, is the invitation for a cultural aspect, like going out. So, there's not a lot of people that they come out and bring, we'll teach you how to ride, and we'll teach you to do this, unless it's with your behavioral health. And I think it needs to go beyond behavioral health, like they said, and reintroduce it, maybe an educational program, which was like Miss Bird said, and I said, was about, maybe teaching someone how to shoe a horse, or how to be a farrier, how do you cut those toenails, something like that to bring our youth back in. Because as we know, there aren't very many farriers in this part of the country where we live at. And I don't know very, you know, and they're expensive, and having someone that can do that, you know, and maybe someone to learn to try to teach them how to break horses, and maybe, like I said, trail rides, coming out and inviting our kids out onto the cultural landscape out there through South Fork and through the original Ute Trail, and bring together some sort of educational program to maybe ride the old trail, just like the old Hickory Trail. Just my thoughts out there. Thank you.
This is Marge Berry again. Several years ago, our education department was headed by the name of a gentleman by the name of Lee Briggs. He coordinated various education trips for our youth. Luckily, my son was about 12 or 13, and my nieces went on one of their trips, and it was a horseback trip north of Durango towards Silverton, and they were gone for a little under a week. They had to ride horses up into the high country, set up camp, and actually cook and do cultural activities. And that was one of the life changing event for him. And thank heavens we already had our horses, so they were pretty familiar with it. But that's something that we need to get back into. And that was a big commitment on our education department and staff, being responsible for these young people, some of whom had never ridden before, and having them out in the outdoors and taking care of those animals and camping outdoors. So that was experiences like that we should probably get back into. I believe the culture department, where Shelly Thompson is the director and Cassandra works there, they have an annual culture camp for our tribal youth. And we had discussed having horseback riding as one of the activities, and it hadn't been worked out yet. But that's another activity that could still be put out there for our youth to enjoy. Thank you.